made myself, this was a stump that I found, and I just cut the top off of it. So I made myself a little chopping block here, because this was bouncing all over the place, and I was worried about digging my axe into the actual ground itself. I live in a very rocky soil area, so I didn't want to dull my axe accidentally driving it into a rock. On the other end, I'm going to cut a notch going right through the middle right here. So I'm going to use my little anvil here and just take my folding saw. You're going to want to get this really stable. So I tend to use a little crook of my boot. I hope you guys can see this okay. And so I just mark here. And here. It's easier to just use the edge to get the blade going. Oops. A little slip there, no big deal. So you're cutting an end grain here, so this saw is not really made for that, so it's going to be a little slow. It'll cut it, but it's just, you know, it's a little bit slow. So right here, I'm cut in maybe about a 1/4 inch. I'm probably going to go down to about, you know, at least a 1/2 inch to 1 inch, just to give myself a nice deep pocket for these branches to sit in. So to get this little chunk out, basically what I'm doing is I'm bracing this with my foot. I'm setting my knife right on the edge here, and I'm using just a baton just to sever the ends of that. And then as I wiggle it out, these pieces have been popping right out. I'm not prying because I'm not trying to ruin my blade. I'm just using, you know, this is a Scandinavian grind blade, so I'm just using the steepness and just getting, you know, little pieces out here and there. And as it starts to loosen up, then you could pry a little bit. But if you pry too much, if you jam it in there and you try and pry it, you're going to break the tip off your knife. So as you can see, the vertical pieces are up, and then I just marked basically how big this needed to be and where I needed to make cuts on each one of these. So now really all I have to do is hog out these. As you can tell, there's a notch here and there's a notch here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knife and I'm just going to chip. Sorry, I should probably be on camera for this. Just be very careful and just rock my knife in there. I'm not trying, obviously it's important to have a nice sharp knife for this because I'm not really putting too much pressure into cutting this. So now that's about as far back as it needs to go. Then I'm just going to take this and just whittle out the rest of it. It doesn't need to be perfect, but what you just don't want to do is cut toward your hand, because if you slip, you're going to cut yourself. I've seen, you know, on Alone or on plenty of other survival style shows that people are, you can even, you know, take the top like this, line it up. I don't know if you guys can see that on camera. Line it up here and then just chip it down. That's probably the fastest way to do it. Basically what my point is do not do anything with your hand down here. You slip, you cut yourself really bad. So even if you're just holding it up here and just hogging out little pieces like that, great. Now one side's nice and flat and it's done. And switch to the other side, do all four, and then really all left that we're gonna have to do is, since this is crossing in an X, we're gonna cut notches that are gonna keep these not only in the same place, but they're gonna kind of keep everything together. Okay, now for these cross braces, it's basically the same thing I was doing for the other ones. I'm just gonna hog out the center of this. You know, one thing I learned in Scouts was to always cut away from you. And I don't know, it's very frustrating to see a lot of people cut. You know, they're pulling their knife towards them. There's so many easier ways to hurt yourself, or you know, harder ways to hurt yourself than just being purely stupid. So I try to, as you know, my legs are not very far from here, so I'm just trying to keep my legs apart and then just switching back and forth, taking out the pieces on the outside and then again on the middle. Still has quite a bit. And since I cut the outsides with a saw, there's really not a lot. I'm just using really light pressure. You know, obviously I'm cutting downwards. I'm just trying to sever the ends here. Make sure there's a nice piece hogged out from there. Obviously it's at an angle, so it looks a little goofy. Then I come back on this one, repeat the same thing. I'm gonna try to come back as far as I can and take out these pieces, so that by the time I'm ready to turn around, and one thing that like you guys can learn from this is, as I'm getting stuck here, this knife is very sharp, so it's just getting stuck in the wood fiber. Now I can either just push as hard as I can and it'll get through, but it's not the most controlled thing. So what I'll do is, as I get caught, if you start rocking your blade, it'll basically start wedging itself in there. It's using leverage as part of physics to pop that piece out rather than just increasing brute power. Because if you're using leverage, you're still controlled. Whereas if you're using brute power, you don't really have a lot of control, and that's where people can get hurt. So now that this is all cleared out, I'm gonna come to the other side and then just basically use the same method of leveraging. I'm not gonna try to go super big chunks because it's not gonna happen. So little pieces at a time, little chips, leverage it out, crack these little pieces out, and then eventually this middle section will be all hogged out, and then I can put it all together and I can start sighting in my bow. Perfect. So now this will sit a little bit better in the middle, and it's suspended so it's not rotting on the ground. It's good bushcraft practice, making these joints, not using any lashings or anything like that. And this is plenty strong. It's just basically standing on its own.